Look in the comments and you'll see people arguing about Nintendo prices. Before I've said a word, I guarantee people have already made up their minds about whether things are overpriced or priced fairly, and a lot of people are unwilling to change their mind. But I want to have an honest discussion about some pricing decisions Nintendo's made recently, and try to explain both perspectives and then give my opinion on it without needing to attack one side on this. Because that's what a lot of the arguments come down to. When someone says something is worth it or not worth it, people immediately get combative. There's people who will always support Nintendo's decisions and make excuses for them no matter what, and there's people who will do the exact opposite. So let's just take a few games and a few items and talk about those in depth. Let's start with $80 for Mario Kart World, which was the big controversy last year. At the time, and really still now, $70 is seen as the normal price for a full AAA game. So when Nintendo announced Mario Kart World would be $80 when it's on a less powerful system than the PS5 and Xbox Series X, a lot of people were justifiably upset. Why is this worth $10 more than other games on more powerful systems that have more content? And a lot of the response to that was, actually it's not $80, it's $50 if you get it with the Switch 2 edition. Immediately that's a very flawed argument to have, because Nintendo themselves is pricing Mario Kart World at $80, so therefore they see it as an $80 game, and you're getting it for $30 cheaper with the Switch 2 bundle. If you don't get the bundle or you get something else, you have to pay $80 for that game. Not everyone got the bundle or was able to get the bundle, so using that as an excuse for the price just doesn't hold up, so we actually have to look at the game on its own merits. Mario Kart is an incredibly popular series, and Mario Kart World was said to be the most expansive Mario Kart game ever. To its credit, it does have a big open world, but the content that it actually has isn't much more than what we've seen in the past. In fact, I would say it has less notable content than Mario Kart 8 Deluxe with the DLC. Sure, you have the big open world, but there's not really much to do in it. You have a few modes, and really all there is find costumes and P-switch in the map. There's really no challenges, no sort of story mode, no missions or anything, so it did disappoint a lot of people. So what made this worth $80 exactly? If we can step back and not try to put emotions into this, which is hard to do when it is something that you are very invested in, we have to justify this game why it cost $80 compared to other games like its competitors. Another open world racing game that's coming out pretty soon is Forza Horizon 6, and that's going to cost $70. So that game will have a lot more content than Mario Kart World. There's just simply going to be more to do, but it doesn't have Mario in the name. Don't get me wrong, Forza Horizon is a very popular series, but it's not Mario Kart. Mario Kart is one of the most popular series, and Nintendo knows that. The reason for this pricing isn't because they need to price it at $80. It's because they know they can get away with it. They know people will buy this because it's Mario Kart. That's why it cost $80. You don't need to justify this price by making up excuses. It's a very simple answer. Personally, I think getting it for $50 with the Switch 2 bundle is a great deal. I think it's a fun game. I think $50 is a fair price tag, but it's not a $50 game. At least it's not listed as one. So in this case, I would say that the price is not worth it. I think $70, even though I feel like that would still be expensive, that's a lot more reasonable for this game. Just because if Nintendo has set Switch 2 pricing at $70 for a physical release for Switch 2 game, then they're being consistent with it, but this is not consistency. All the other Switch 2 games that are not Switch 2 editions, which I will get to soon, have been priced at $70. So Mario Kart World is $10 more, and I think it's very obvious why, and we don't need to defend that. Now, how about Nintendo Welcome Tour, which was another big controversy? So it's only $10, and you may be thinking, $10 for a game? That's not a big deal. And you're right, $10 is not a lot for a game. The problem is that Nintendo was charging for this, and this has been talked about so much, I don't want to go as in-depth to it, but you're telling me this really couldn't be a pack-in title? Like Nintendo Switch Welcome Tour needed that $10 price tag? At that point, it's hard to say it's anything other than greed, so I can't justify that. But how about Donkey Kong Bonanza, which was one of the first big releases for the Switch 2? I actually think that is worth the price. If Nintendo is matching AAA competitors with the $70 price tag, that has become the norm in gaming, that's not unusual. Donkey Kong Bonanza gives you enough content, it's unique. So that's a price I think is justified, and there were people who were upset about it. What you're getting compared to other things on the market for the same price, you get a great experience with that. Donkey Kong Bonanza is a game you could spend a lot of time in. It's very fun to play, and it's one of the few games so far that I feel like actually takes advantage of the Switch 2 from Nintendo. Like, I just can't imagine this game running on the original Switch. This is, in my opinion and most people's opinions, a much better game than Mario Kart World that's going to give you a lot more entertainment. It doesn't have the multiplayer, sure, which of course is the main part of Mario Kart. I just simply think it's the better game, and I can support that pricing decision. So like I said, every Switch 2 game is at least $70 right now, at least from Nintendo. So I could go through all of them and just talk about the quality, whether it's Kirby Air Riders, Hyrule Warriors, Mario Tennis Fever. We can have discussions about if these games are actually worth the price, but I guess Nintendo's consistent with it. Like, I think the least justifiable out of these is Mario Tennis Fever. I just don't think a Mario Tennis game is worth $70, especially since it does reuse a lot of assets from Mario Tennis Aces. But value is subjective, and if you think it's worth it, go ahead and buy it. I think it's far from the most egregious decisions Nintendo has made with pricing. The most egregious decisions I would say Nintendo has with their pricing is the Switch 2 editions. So this is something I've talked about a lot before, and it's something that has stayed in the news for like the past year at this point. Games that originally released years earlier, or even games that originally released in the past, sometimes years earlier, being more expensive because they're on the Switch 2. Breath of the Wild, which was an 8-year-old game last year, came out at $60 for the Wii U and Switch. And then for minor upgrades, cost $70 on Switch 2, Tears of the Kingdom for $80 when it was originally $70, Mario Party Jamboree for $80 when it was $60, Kirby for $80 when it was $60. Sure, you're getting new content in the ones that are $20 more, but I think what really rubs me the wrong way, especially with something like Breath of the Wild, is that it doesn't come with the DLC. So Breath of the Wild has DLC. I think it's $20 for the DLC. So at least if Nintendo released this for $70 and you got the Switch 2 upgrades, you got whatever else it includes, and you got the DLC, it's a little more justifiable, because at least you're getting that extra content, and there's never been like a deluxe edition of Breath of the Wild, at least one that has the DLC with it. But the fact that it doesn't include that, I think I just can't say is anything other than greed. Like, it's an 9-year-old game, and if you're defending this, I can't imagine you're ever gonna really be critical about any of Nintendo's pricing. You're entitled to your beliefs, to value what you want to value, but if you're just never willing to call out Nintendo for any pricing decisions, you can't be objective. I've called out a lot of Nintendo's pricing decisions, but I've also supported some, like Donkey Kong Bonanza. I think the price of the Switch 2 itself is perfectly fine. I think $450 in this economy is fine for what you're getting with the Switch 2. And as much as some people will defend Nintendo, you have to say that Nintendo has done a lot of this to themselves. They haven't been consistent about pricing. The Super Mario Galaxy Collection, which is 2 remasters, released at $70. Now, these are 2 fantastic games, my 2 favorite games of all time. And I think $60, I think it's still a lot because you are getting games, and I think $60 is still a lot, especially if you have Super Mario 3D All-Stars Collection. But that's consistent with Switch pricing, where most Switch games are $60. This is not a Switch 2 game. This is a Switch 1 game, and it's priced at $70 when it's a collection of 2 Wii games that are remastered. So it just is hard for me to defend that pricing. Like, if you try to find remastered collections of other games, there's a lot of remastered collections of other games. It's almost never gonna be that expensive. There will be remasters that are that expensive, and I think that's a problem too. I'm not justifying that. But I'd say more often than not, they're newer games. Like, these are games that at the time came out 15 and 18 years ago respectively, and they're not remakes, they're remasters. A remake is different because at least it's building it from the ground up. So while I think this is a great collection, I don't think these games needed a remake. We can say that $70 just seems a little bit much for it, especially when you take into account that it's not consistent with Switch pricing, because game prices do depreciate over time, at least the worth of a game. Maybe not physical copies depending on rarity and resale values there, but I talked about this in one of my Pokemon videos. Go on Steam, find any game from like 10 years plus, and chances are it's going to be very cheap. An example I used was Fallout New Vegas. Came out in 2010 for $60. It's $10 now. Pretty much any AAA game over time simply loses its value because less people are going to be buying it over time. A game launches at $70, the people who are willing to pay full price for it will get it at $70, and over time, as more people start to sell the game and the physical copies get cheaper, and less people are buying it digitally, price is going to go down to encourage more people to buy. That happens for most games. Like, it's something you cannot argue. Some people are trying to argue about this, but it's an objective fact that most games depreciate in value digitally over time. And a counter to this that also isn't accurate is that inflation doesn't affect digital goods. That's not true either. This is, of course, labor costs, so it's not like inflation doesn't affect anything because it's digital, but inflation isn't as black and white as some people say it is. Like, someone will point to a $60 game in 2017 and say, this should actually be $70 now, because once again, the depreciation of game prices, that game may have been a flagship game in 2017, but now that's on the previous generation. And then again, with inflation, wages have not kept up, so even though on paper the $60 may be quote-unquote the same as $70 today, it's not exactly as black and white as you think it is. So going back to Nintendo prices directly, how about sales? People say Nintendo games never go on sale, and that isn't true. A lot of Nintendo games don't go on sale for a while. A lot of Nintendo sales aren't as big as other sales, but they do go on sale, and I think sometimes it does make a game worth it. But I get most of my games cheaper even without waiting for a sale, because if you buy physical games, if you look on eBay or any marketplace, most games you'll find cheaper over time. Like, there's a lot of games that I simply don't feel are worth it to me at their price, but I still want them. So I'm fine waiting a few months to go to eBay, or just buying a used copy if I can find it in a store, and getting that at a price I feel is worth it. That's simply how I vote. If I don't think a game is worth it, or if I don't need it at that launch price, I just don't buy it then. I don't shame people for buying it. I don't think that should be part of the conversation to attack people because they think a game is worth it when you don't. I think that's nearly as bad as people who will just defend prices that don't seem justifiable. And then a counter to that, which in some ways I do agree with, is that if you are supporting a company overpricing products, then they're going to continue overpricing it. But I don't think we should be taking that out on the consumer. I think we should have discussions about it and say, I don't think it's worth it, and I think this is supporting unethical behavior from a company. So here's why I would wait on this game, or here's why I don't think you should support them. But if they disagree, just leave it at that. What someone does with their money actually can affect you, like I said with this example, but that's not what your focus should be on. There's a lot more to talk about, and I can't go over every single example, but there are a few I think are worth noting. The whole Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green situation, I've talked about in 2 videos, so you could check that out if you want my thoughts on that. But besides games, there are other things that are, in my opinion, pretty hard to justify. Like Amiibo being $40 for Mario Galaxy, like $40 each. It got to a point where I think Nintendo probably knew that they were overcharging too much, because it got to a point where retailers probably knew this was overcharging and lowered it to $35. And I can almost guarantee it's going to go down in price even more unless they just make such a limited amount of these. Like the Donkey Kong Bonanza Amiibo that launched at $30. A few months later, I found it on sale for $20. Street Fighter Amiibo, which launched at $40 each, I found for $6. All of them for $6 each. So the Mario Galaxy Amiibo, they look great, don't get me wrong. $40 or now $35. It's not a price a lot of people are going to want to pay for a figure they're never going to use. It's not like it has something you need for the game. It's a collector's item. That's what it is. Some Amiibo being $50, I mean, it's just hard to justify. Nintendo has like the Alarmo for $100. These are products that it's just hard for me to think of an argument to justify it. And you don't hate Nintendo if you call this out, you're just questioning why they feel the need to charge this much. And that's where a lot of this gets lost, is that we can't really have honest discussions about pricing because it always becomes emotional. There's not always strong emotions involved. Sometimes you simply think that something isn't worth it. And again, value is subjective. Another thing I think Nintendo has that is completely worth it is Nintendo Switch Online. For $20 a year, you get access to Nintendo Switch Online, and you get access to a bunch of classic games. Now, my issue is that you don't actually own these games. I prefer game ownership, but for $20 a year and getting NES, SNES, and Game Boy, like there's a lot of content there. You get some other things. Of course, you get regular online play with it. You get voice chat. You get a couple exclusive games and some offers. But $20, I don't think that's a bad deal at all. These games used to be $5 or so, sometimes a little more on the Wii U and 3DS. So if you play 4 of them in a year, you're making your money worth. And it's not exactly like that because you don't own them. Like you're paying for like a limited license to play them. But again, for $20 a year for literally less than $2 a month, I think that comes out to $167 a month. I don't think that's a bad deal at all. Now $50, that's a little pricier if you want to get N64, Game Boy Advance, Sega Genesis. I think that's a little harder to argue. I don't think it's ridiculous either. From other companies, like to get classic games, it's a lot more. Like I forgot what PlayStation's is, but it's like over $100 or something for like the premium plan, which I think has access to some of the classic games. So is $50 a little pricier? Yeah. Like, I don't mind arguments going against that, but I think it's just hard to argue against the $20 price per year. A lot of arguments I also see tend to not focus on Nintendo, but focus on other companies. Like, they'll say, okay, this might be expensive, but Sony's doing this, but Microsoft is doing this. And okay, we can talk about that. We don't have to single out Nintendo, but also just seems like they're trying to make excuses and just trying to say, well, I can't defend this point, but Nintendo is doing something better than these companies, so it's okay. And I don't think that's fair. I think Nintendo deserves some praise for actually being the one console left that actually has exclusives, for Nintendo actually moving on to the Switch 2 for the most part. Like, we're not even a year into the console, and most of Nintendo's games at this point are coming out on the Switch 2, compared with Sony and Microsoft, who are now in year 6 of the current gen consoles, and are now finally starting to leave the previous consoles in the past. They've also made a lot of games move towards the live service model, when Nintendo has more often than not focused on single player games, and even when they have multiplayer, they're not games that will die when the servers shut down because they have single player content. We can talk about that, but those are different arguments entirely. The whole point I'm trying to make in this video is that Nintendo's pricing is not always unjustifiable. Sometimes I think it's fair. Sometimes I think it's hard to justify. Sometimes I think there is a justification there, but to me, it's not personally worth it. And no one will ever agree on this. You'll see people arguing in the comments. You'll see people probably from both sides saying I'm either defending Nintendo too much or hating on Nintendo too much. Because once again, people are very, very passionate about this topic. People will hate on Nintendo and say, I'm never buying a Nintendo console again. They've been lazy, they charge ridiculous amounts for their games. Anyone who supports them is an idiot. And then you'll have people who say, I think these prices are perfectly fine. Nintendo doesn't overcharge anything. It's worth it. There's inflation. Game prices don't go down. Like, if you really listen to that, do either of those sound reasonable to you? And while they may sound like straw mans, they're really not. There are a lot of people who make these exact arguments. And just because something is worth it to you, like just because you really want something so you're willing to pay a premium for it, that doesn't mean that someone who doesn't think it's worth it is invalid. I've seen people say Mario Tennis Fever is worth the $70 price tag because they know they're going to get 50 hours of content out of it. Most people aren't playing Mario Tennis Fever for 50 hours. Technically, you can play any game for 50 hours. It doesn't mean the price needs to go up. Like, I could play Cookie Clicker for 50 hours if I wanted to. Would that make it worth a $70 price tag? No. The amount of hours in a game, in my opinion, doesn't make or break the price. I'd rather pay $70 for a 15 or 20 hour game that has a great campaign than pay $7 for a huge RPG that's going to take 80 hours to beat that just feels like it has a lot of padding. So I don't think that's necessarily a fair justification either. I think if a game's super short, then yeah, you could use that against it. Something like the Resident Evil 3 remake was like 4 hours and priced at $60. Yeah, like that's not a lot of content in the game. We can knock the game for its price there. But it's usually a case-by-case basis. It's usually not all or nothing like people make it out to be. Nintendo is a company. Their goal is to make money. If Nintendo can get away with charging $70 for some games that we don't feel are $70 because enough people will buy it and their sales aren't getting hurt, why wouldn't they do that? Like, if you put yourself in their shoes, if there's enough people supporting their price tag, why would they lower the price? The price is just going to get lower if people aren't supporting it. Like with the Amiibo, I know it wasn't Nintendo directly, but clearly not enough people wanted to pay $40 for the Amiibo, so the price got lowered. That's the only way to get prices lowered, because that shows that people just don't want to pay that price for it. And that ties back to what I was saying about older games losing value. It's because most people who already wanted a game 3 years after it's released, they would have bought that game already. There's less people who are going to be buying it at that price years after, and there's going to be more resellers. So why would I pay $70 digitally for a game I get for $25 if I bought from Amazon or eBay or wherever? Some people may prefer digital games, not with that big of a price difference. So then if the digital game goes lower in price, then they're more willing to buy that. And that's just a simplified version of this. I could probably talk about this for hours, but I just wanted to give some opinions on Nintendo pricing so far, since it has been a very hot topic for a long time now, and it's been an even hotter topic now with Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green. And I do counter some arguments that people have been making, justifying the reasoning for those prices in another video. But let me know things you feel are fairly priced from Nintendo and things that you don't feel are fairly priced. I want to know both in a comment, rather than just everything they make is overpriced or everything they make is fairly priced. Because if you make either of these claims, it's hard to take you seriously when you have this all or nothing approach and don't want to have any nuance to it. And I'm sure some people will say, well, I can't say that they're overpricing it anything because they're not, or I can't say that anything is fairly priced because it's all overpriced. And some people may legitimately believe that, but at least looking at it objectively and trying to be reasonable, I don't think that necessarily holds up. So do let me know in the comments, and if you want to hear more takes like this, or I try to be as balanced as I can, be sure to subscribe.